There's nothing like being in a graveyard to remind us of our own mortality. Now, of all the graves in this cemetery, there are two in particular that cause me to stop and to think. Now, the first grave that causes me to stop and think is this one. It's the grave of the Reverend Neil Coslet, a man who came with his young family to minister here in Burscough, a man who was a pioneer of the Christian healing ministry. Yet someone who becomes ill within about a year of moving here, dies, leaving a widow and a young family. And I find myself wondering, what was God doing? And the other grave that causes me to stop and to pray and to reflect is this, the grave of our dear friend Simon, much loved as a curate and then as vicar here at St. John's. A man with vision, ideas, energy and enthusiasm. A new beginning in ministry here in Burscough. A new curate just arrived. Vision forming and lots of ideas. And then very short illness and Simon's untimely passing. And again, it causes me to wonder, what was God doing? When you're involved in Christian ministry, you often come across issues that lead you to ask questions, to wonder, what's God doing in this situation? How is he at work? And it's the same for the prophet Habakkuk. He looks at the suffering of God's people, experiencing violence and injustice, and he cries out from his heart, "How long, O Lord? How long?" And we see Habakkuk raising questions, asking, what is God doing? And in chapter 1, verses 5 through to 11, God answers Habakkuk's initial complaint. And he says that in answer to the wickedness and sinfulness of God's people, he is going to use the Babylonians, a nation that is even more wicked and sinful than God's people. And through the Babylonians, he is going to work out his plan. This raises a whole load more questions for Habakkuk. He doesn't understand. What is God doing? What is he playing at? And so he makes his second complaint to God, as we will hear now in our Bible reading.
Today's Bible reading is Psalm 13, verse 3. Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. Amen.
Today's reading is from Habakkuk 1 verse 12 through to 2 verse 2. Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you will never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? You have made people like the fish in the sea, like the sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked foe pulls all of them up with hooks. He catches them in his nets. He gathers them up in his dragnets, and so he rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his nets and burns incense to his dragnets, for by his nets he lives in luxury and enjoys the choicest food. Is he to keep on emptying his net, destroying nations without mercy? I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to the sea what he will say to me, and what answer I am to give to this complaint.
So Habakkuk finds himself thinking and saying, if the Babylonians are part of the answer, then what on earth is the question? How can God stand to use a wicked and godless nation as part of his plan and purpose? And so Habakkuk clearly states to God that this does not make sense to him. Now, I think my time in the army has helped me look at complex and messy situations and be able to begin to identify where God is at work in those complex situations. And to illustrate this, I want to share with you two particular stories. During the time that I was a chaplain, working in military field hospitals on operations, working with other medics and kind of medical staff, I became very familiar with people who sustained often life-changing injuries, those who were casualties through gunshots and explosions. And one of the things that I noticed, that I met a significant number of people who had had very lucky escapes. Now, getting shot or blown up isn't a lucky thing whatsoever. But I can remember instances where if the wound had just been slightly different to the left or to the right, it would have been fatal. There was one instance where a soldier was shot and the round went in through the top of his shoulder, passed all the way through his body, and actually exited sort of at his waist. And it missed every major organ and every blood vessel. And he said what a lucky escape he'd had, because that could have so easily been a fatal injury. So I noticed all those lucky escapes. But I also became aware of soldiers who were injured because they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Rather than turning to the right, they went left and were caught in an incident or an ambush. And I found myself reflecting on that experience. Those who were lucky, those who were fortunate, and those who escaped serious injury, and those who were badly injured because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Did God favour those who escaped? Was his blessing on them? And actually he didn't care and he was indifferent to the plight of those who did get injured. Where was God in those incidents? As a chaplain, every day I prayed for the medical staff that I was working with, the soldiers, the sailors, the Air Force personnel. Every day as I gathered and said my prayers and read the Bible, I prayed for the safety of all those who were deployed on operations. And yet, as I prayed, I knew that my prayer couldn't fully be answered. I knew even though I was praying for people's safety, people would get hurt, people would be injured, and that people would get killed. So did God listen to my prayers, or some of my prayers, and keep some people safe? And at other times, was he just not listening, or he didn't care about certain people, and he allowed them to be injured or killed? Now, I can't believe in a God who is that fickle, who shows love and compassion to some people and chronic disregard to others. That is not the God we see in the Bible. We see a God who is absolutely loving, who is compassionate, who cares for all of creation, and who cares for every human being. But the thing that I began to discover is that as God is at work in a sovereign way in his world, he is also respectful of the laws of nature within creation, so that a bullet that is travelling through the air won't suddenly deviate and go off course so it misses somebody. God is respectful of the laws of nature in creation and chooses to work within the constraints of those laws. In the incarnation, Jesus coming to earth, God himself in human form, we see Jesus accepting the limitations of being a human being, of living and working and ministering in this world. Jesus gets tired. He gets hungry. He says that he is thirsty. In that story and in the wonder of the incarnation, we see God limited by being at work in this world. And yet, even within those limitations, Jesus brings salvation and redemption. God's rescue plan for all of humanity is fulfilled. It seems to me there is a dynamic tension between, on one hand, God's sovereignty and his absolute power over the world he has created, and yet his respect for the created order and its laws. And there is this dynamic tension between those things, and almost God allows himself to be self-limited. That concept of a dynamic kind of relationship between God's absolute sovereignty and almost the limitations of him being able to work in this world is a really difficult thing for us to understand and comprehend. These are the big questions that we see Habakkuk wrestling with as he tries to make sense of the world that he sees. Now, as an army chaplain, one of my responsibilities was to hold those in command responsible for their actions and their decisions. The army had a phrase for it, speaking truth to power. And it was my responsibility to challenge commanders and make them think carefully about their actions and their decisions. Now, I had the privilege of working alongside some absolutely fantastic commanders for whom I had a great respect for their leadership of the units I worked with. I have to say, I also worked alongside some people and under some people who I thought were absolute idiots. But it was my job as a chaplain to hold them accountable for the decisions they were making. In a similar way, Habakkuk feels that it is his responsibility to hold God to account for the actions that he sees expressed in the world. Why, Lord, are you using the Babylonians? Why are you using that wicked group of people? How can you fulfill your purposes through them? And so Habakkuk, as a prophet, he speaks truth both to God's people, but he speaks truth to power too. He speaks in a plain, honest and direct way to God and challenges God to justify his actions and his decisions. When I was serving in Iraq, and as Christmas was approaching, I began to put together a plan of activity for the soldiers over that Christmas period. Although we were away from our homes and our families and friends, I wanted to make it the best possible Christmas that we could have. We organised carol concerts, Christmas meals, special Christmas entertainment. And when I went to talk to the commanding officer about the plans that I was putting in place, although he was warm to the ideas, I felt he was always trying to kind of rein me in and suggest that perhaps we shouldn't put together quite as full a programme as I had planned. I was puzzled by this and challenged him about why he was trying to kind of reduce Christmas, why he was suddenly trying to be Scrooge. And he kept saying to me, David, there is a bigger picture. You need to understand there is a bigger plan. What I discovered was that come Christmas Day, the commanders had planned a huge military operation trying to bring security to a particularly lawless part of Basra, the town in which I was stationed. I didn't know that bigger plan. I was focused on my bit, my world, trying to organise a Christmas dinner for the troops in my care. But my commanding officer, he saw the bigger plan. He knew there was a bigger picture and that actually it was going to be impossible for us to put together that Christmas programme because the troops were needed elsewhere. Sometimes we complain to God. We can't understand why he's not doing or allowing certain things to happen. We see our bit of the map really clearly and we can see what God needs to do. But God is so much bigger than we are. His perspective is so much greater. He sees the bigger picture. Each of the graves in this graveyard are a reminder of a loved one, but they're also reminders of sad and difficult times, moments of loss, times where we've wondered, what is God doing? Where is God in this situation? These two military graves are reminders of lives that have been lost at too young an age. But even in the face of loss and suffering, those times where we wonder, what is God doing? We can trust that God is loving, he is faithful, he is kind, he is just, that he does have a plan.